May 6, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Hashimoto wins IWGP title. Michaels vs. Diesel at In Your House, World of MMA goes completely nuts. More. By Observer Staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. May 6, 1996. Shinya Hashimoto captured the IWGP Heavyweight Championship from Nobuiko Takata via cross-arm breaker submission to headline the April 29 Tokyo Dome show, which drew the second largest crowd in the history of Japanese wrestling and in what is believed to be the second largest live gate in the history of pro wrestling. The card, entitled 96 Battle Formation, drew a sellout crowd announced at 65,000 fans and a gate that should have approached $6 million. As of press time, the actual figure wasn't available, for a show which also saw both the heavyweight and junior heavyweight titles change, as the great Sasuke from Michinoku Pro Wrestling captured the IWGP Junior title, pinning Jushin Liger. The attendance and gate trail in their respective categories. Only the October 9, 1995 card at the Tokyo Dome headlined by Takata vs. Keiji Muto, which drew 67,000 fans, the all-time record for any event in the Dome, and $6.1 million, the first pro wrestling event in history to top the $6 million barrier. It was reported to us as being a great show with every match but two being a good match. With his third Tokyo Dome sellout on top over the past 7 months, Takata has been the constant on top in the biggest major show run in the history of pro wrestling. Because of that, once again one must question the decision to change the title this early in the run, which presumably was made before Takata even won the title from Muto on January 4. It was largely accepted in Japan that keeping Takata on top and running him through several new opponents in dream matches would maximize business for the remainder of this year. The decision was apparently made and kept since Takata isn't a New Japan regular performer, and because of the belief Takata at any time could simply retire, as he announced he would last year. In addition, Takata's performance has been disappointing in almost every major match since he started headlining with New Japan. If the retirement were to happen, New Japan wouldn't have had one of its top wrestlers score the last win over him and get the belt back clean. Complete show results. 1. Yuji Nagata and Tokumitsu Ishizawa upset Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto in 11:20 when Nagata pinned Kanemoto with a superplex off the top rope. This was said to have been a strong opener. 2. Riki Choshu and Takashi Iizuka and Osamu Nishimura and Satoshi Kojima beat Shiro Koshinaka, Kunyaki Kobayashi and Tatsutoshi Goto and Akira Nagami in 11:04 when Choshu pinned Nagami after a lariat. 3. Sasuke pinned Liger to win the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title in 1927. This result was probably for two reasons. Most importantly, it created a reason for Sasuke to return to New Japan and gave Liger a new opponent to headline against. The other is political, as with the interpromotional match with Great Muta vs. Jinsei Hakushi Shinzaki of Michinoku Pro is one of the headline matches on the show, and with Muta going over, this was the bone thrown the way of Michinoku Pro to let them come up even on the show. This was one of the better matches on the show, with Sasuke going in with a right knee injury and Liger working over the knee most of the way. Sasuke got the win with a powerbomb and tiger suplex for the pin. Before the next match started, Antonio Inoki was introduced and he talked about the card in Los Angeles on June 1, and then introduced Dan Severn as his tag team partner and announced Severn as joining New Japan. Severn mentioned he's now held 85 different championships between amateur wrestling and other sports including Ultimate Fighting, Judo, Sambo and Pro Wrestling, mentioned being the Ultimate and NWA champion. 4. Randy Savage pinned Hiroyoshi Tenzan in 9:49 after two elbow drops off the top rope. This wasn't a good match as Tenzan carried it, but it was okay. 5. Masa Chono defeated Lex Luger via submission in 14:37 using the STF. Again, these two results were largely political as WCW got to split its two matches against New Japan, and Chono got his submission win back for his submission loss at Starrcade. Tenzan didn't get his win back because he's not as of yet considered a star of the caliber of Savage. This was the only bad match on the show. 6. The Road Warriors returned to Japan after many years' absence as far as being a tag team, teaming with Power Warrior Kensuke Sasaki donning the Hellraiser's gimmick, to beat Rick and Scott Steiner and Scott Norton in 15:17 when Animal pinned Rick after the Road Warriors used their double impact finish on him. This was said to have been a great match. Animal got one of the biggest pops of the entire show in his return to the ring in Japan after 4+ years. 7. Muta pinned Shinzaki in 1944 using the moonsault after blowing mist in Shinzaki's face. This was reported to be easily the best match on the show. Shinzaki juiced heavy and apparently pulled out every move in the back in attempting to score what would have been an incredible upset. 8. Genichiro Tenryu pinned Tatsumi Fujinami in 9-16 after a clothesline. During the match, Fujinami legitimately had his nose broken and blood was spurting everywhere for the entire match. This was said to have been a surprisingly good match, one of the 2 or 3 best on the show. 9. Hashimoto defeated Takata in 12:33 with a cross-arm breaker submission after a DDT. Both men got near submissions and rope breaks with a cross-arm breaker earlier in the match, and traded the super stiff kicks. Hashimoto got the biggest pop of the show, winning the title back for New Japan. Most fans thought it was the best match on the card because of the finish and title change, but I was told it wasn't as good as it sounds on paper. The Dome show, it lasted 4 hours, will be edited down to 3 hours and broadcast in 3 segments on TV Asahi. The first show, which will have the heavyweight title change, will be broadcast on a special 5 p.m. slot on May 6th, while the other 2 hours air in New Japan's regular early AM time slot on May 11th and May 18th. Shawn Michaels and Diesel put on a memorable performance to make an otherwise average show into a strong show on the April 28th WWF In Your House pay-per-view at the Omaha Civic Center. The show drew a sellout 9,563 fans, 8,273 paying $120,668. It was the largest wrestling gate ever in Omaha for a show that sold out about 5 hours before match time. There were reports of it being the largest crowd for wrestling ever in Omaha, but with wrestling having the big history in Omaha and numerous previous sellouts in the same building for shows without production kills for pay-per-view, I wouldn't think that would be the case. If Michaels and Diesel were the strength of the show, putting on easily the best WWF pay-per-view match so far this year, then Ultimate Warrior and Goldust were every bit as much of a negative. The highlights of the main event were Diesel powerbombing Michaels through Vince McMahon's broadcast table, sending the monitors and other expensive equipment scurrying for cover. McMahon and Jerry Lawler were then forced to announce the remainder of the match without their monitors and standing up so they could see the action in the ring. Diesel then threw wrestling legend Mad Dog Vachon, an Omaha resident, over the guardrail and pulled off his artificial leg. It was a major news story in Omaha years back when Vachon was hit by a car while either jogging or walking on the side of a road and needed his leg amputated to use as a weapon. As it turned out, Michaels gave Diesel a low blow and got Vachon's artificial leg, and used it to set up the winning pin. Both Diesel and Razor Ramone were given pay-per-view send-offs before they leave for WCW that would be classified as far less than burials. While Ramone also did the job on the show, putting over Vader, he was given a great deal of offense in a match made to look far more competitive than most would have figured under the circumstances. In the post-match commentary, McMahon went out of his way not to bury Ramone, and actually did quite the opposite, praising him for his performance. It appeared McMahon was trying to do exactly the opposite of what he thought Eric Bischoff would do in the same situation. Goldust clearly couldn't work the show. And unfortunately, being wrestling promoters, even when they make a policy of trying to be honest with fans after some memorable bait and switches of the past, Shawn Michaels at the Winnipeg pay-per-view coming immediately to mind, it seems they can't help themselves when it comes to destroying credibility if even a few bucks are at stake. Let's go under the assumption that the Goldust thing was a day-to-day deal, and the fact was, WWF didn't hide it all. The fact Goldust was injured, immediately putting it on its own 900 line, but always emphasizing that he was expected to work the pay-per-view. That was fine if as of midweek, when the syndication was completed and they still expected him to work the match, that they didn't release the word of the injury on television even though the injury had taken place weeks earlier. As of this writing, I'm not clear one way or the other who really knew what and expected what of whether or not Goldust would have been ready, although there are WWF insiders who were insisting to me that he wasn't going to be ready for the pay-per-view, while I was being told by the WWF that they weren't certain, but expected he'd be able to work, although admitted he'd be nowhere near 100%. The problem was, just as WCW baited and switched its viewers on the last pay-per-view by doing major hype job on using Brian Pillman in the main event, and never mentioning during the pregame show that Pillman wasn't coming, and ironically even during the pay-per-view broadcast hinting that Pillman would eventually show up even though Pillman had given word a few days ahead that he couldn't come, WWF did the same thing. No better. No worse. Maybe even worse, because from the beginning of the hype of this show, Warrior and Goldust was pushed as the number 2 match for the number 2 belt on this show, whereas Pillman was actually only mentioned at the last minute of even being on the WCW show. Again, doing a 30-minute live pregame show that gave the WWF time to either tell the truth or shoot an angle if they wanted to with Goldust, and shooting a last-minute angle to negate an advertised and heavily pushed match would still be false advertising unless the day-to-day aspect of the Goldust injury was the case and they did do an angle. and still explain he couldn't work and announce a sub-match to take his place, since this was the second most pushed match on the show. There would have been a problem with consistency, as when they pulled the bait and switch in the Michaels deal in October. By precedent, they'd have to switch the title from Goldust, something they obviously didn't want to do, and certainly the last thing they wanted was to put the thing on Warrior. But the WWF has never had a problem in the past with having consistency or logic of angles or adhering to past precedent setting, so they sent the guys out to do a non-match with a walkout finish that achieved the impossible. It was actually worse than the Doomsday match, at the time the worst pay-per-view main event in history. And even though the argument could be made that Goldust was there in the flesh, it was bait and switch because they knew going in he couldn't perform to a level of doing even a poor match, and they knew during the pregame show that no match would take place since that garbage had already been booked. On the plus side, the pacing of the angles of the show was excellent. A lot was thrown out there, but at no time was so much thrown out at once that it was too much to take in. The video features were all strong. The announcing was good, although again few innovative moves were taking place, which is where both McMahon and Jerry Lawler have their weaknesses in that style. Another plus was that by the time the show was over, the entire next pay-per-view lineup for May 26th in Florence, South Carolina was announced: Savio Vega vs. Steve Austin, which is being billed locally already as a Caribbean strap match, although that wasn't said on the pay-per-view, but from TV you can see that's where it'll end up. Mark Merrow vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Vader vs. Yokozuna, Goldust defending the IC title against Undertaker, which is being advertised in Florence as a cage match, although it'll wind up being a casket match, and Michaels defending the WWF title against Davey Boy Smith. Michaels Smith is a good working match on paper but not a pay-per-view headliner as a draw, so they are throwing in an angle where Smith wants to kill Michaels because he believes Michaels is putting the moves on his wife. They did a tremendous angle the next night at Raw to set up the match. Because that show will be held during Memorial Day weekend, they are doing their first replay showing on another night of an In Your House on that show with a Tuesday night replay. All in all, I thought it was the best overall pay-per-view show of the year, even though there was only one great match, although I'm in the minority opinion on that score. A Merrow beat 1-2-3 Kid via DQ in 7:17. Kid physically looked bad. His work was sloppy and he was weighed down in weight, appearing to be in the 165 to 170 range. Merrow hit a nice top A to pop the crowd early, but still had problems working with the looser WWF ring ropes. Helmsley came to ringside at the 3-minute mark and began chasing Sable. Merrow came out to protect her, but Kid blindsided him with a baseball slide. Helmsley then left ringside. After Kid missed a splash off the top, Merrow did a spinning head scissors and appeared on his way to the win when Helmsley ran back out for the DQ. When Merrow went after Helmsley, Kid kicked him from behind and Helmsley left Merrow laying with the pedigree. Not a bad match, but a disappointing match. 1 3/4 stars. During the pregame show, they had a Warrior interview which ended with Goldust blowing the dust in his eyes, which was poorly done. They showed Jose Lothario talking to Mad Dog Vachon to set up Vachon's presence in the building. Diesel did a fake shoot interview teasing that since they were on live, he could say or do anything he wanted, and called himself the baddest mother trucker in the WWF and threatened he'd do something to McMahon at the pay-per-view. They dropped the hints of Diesel pulling a shoot and leaving for WCW for those who knew he was leaving, without directly saying it for those who didn't, similar to a Japanese-style angle. Doak Hendricks announced Goldust ran away from Warrior, slipped on water and hurt his knee, but they never acted as if he wasn't going to wrestle on the pay-per-view show. They pretended that Sonny had flashed Phineas Godwin backstage. 1. Davey Boy Smith and Owen Hart beat Jake Roberts, Aurelian Smith Jr., and Ahmed Johnson, Tony Norris in 13:47. This was made into a tag since Smith's knee wasn't ready, so they needed to add Hart to the show to save the match. Before the match, Roberts pulled out the snake and Jim Cornette fainted and Smith pretended to give him CPR. Even though Johnson's work was still pretty bad, he shows a lot of fire and potential to get over like a big dog. Roberts was in most of the way, and looked bad because he's so out of shape. It was really a one-person match. Finish saw Smith hit Roberts twice with Cornette's tennis racket and use a standing knee lock for a submission. Considering Smith is going to main event the next pay-per-view show, it was surprising to not see them put him over stronger in the finish. 1 3/4 stars. 2. Warrior Jim Hellwig beat Goldust, Dustin Runnels, via count-out in 7:47 of an IC title match. Goldust came out with a new bodyguard, who wasn't given a name, Mike Halleck aka Mantor aka Bruiser Mastino. This was horrible. Warrior grabbed Marlena's cigar and began smoking it, sat in her chair and put on Goldust's wig, and Goldust mainly complained and was barely in the ring. It would have been okay for 2 minutes, but it never ended. Finally, Warrior burned Goldust's hand with the cigar and clotheslined him out of the chair, which was the first body contact of the entire match, and Goldust walked out for the countout. Not only a worst match of the year candidate, but a worst match of the decade candidate. -3.5 stars. 3. Vader, Leon White, pinned Ramone, Scott Hall, in 14:49. Vader dominated early, but Ramone got a strong comeback. Vader looked to have put on another 15 pounds, and it works against him in long matches. Still, it was a good match with some good near falls and solid psychology. Finish saw Razor go for the Razor's Edge, but Vader flipped out of it and gave him a hip drop for the pin. 3.25 stars. 4. Bodydonas, Chris Candido and Tom Pritchard, retained the WWF Tag Titles, beating the Godwins, Dennis Knight and Mark Canterbury, in 7:17. Slightly better, but basically along the same lines as their WrestleMania match. They are pushing the angle where Pig is infatuated with Sunny and Sunny uses it to her team's advantage. Sunny gave Pig an autograph photo of her and he concentrated on it more than the match. Finish saw Hog use the slop drop on Skip, but they did the switch behind Hog's back and Zip pinned him with an inside cradle. Hog got mad and put the picture of Sunny in the slop, but Pig took it out and wiped off the photo and left with it. 1.75 stars. 5. Shawn Michaels, Michael Hickenbottom, retained the WWF title, pinning Diesel, Kevin Nash, in 17:53. Michaels did an Orihara moonsault from the top turnbuckle outside the ring to the floor. Diesel pulled off Spanish-language announcer Hugo Savinovic's boot and used it. Michaels did the Ray Stevens flip into the corner and crashed into the guardrail. Diesel took over and choked out ref Earl Hebner with tape and pulled off the belt from his pants and began whipping Michaels. He hung Michaels over the ropes, tied to the ropes by the belt. Diesel threw Howard Finkel out of his chair and gave Michaels 2 chair shots to the back. As he went for a third chair shot, this time to the head, Michaels moved and Diesel's chair shot hit the ropes and rebounded in his own face. As Michaels went to use the chair, Diesel hit him with a low blow. Michaels' selling was tremendous. Diesel power-bombed Michaels through McMahon and Lawler's table with the monitors flying. Michaels made a comeback by spraying Diesel with a fire extinguisher that was underneath the ring. He used 2 chair shots before Diesel cut him off with a foot to the face. He went for the jackknife, but Michaels fell on top of him and came off the top rope with an elbow drop. As Michaels went for the superkick, Diesel blocked it and hit a clothesline and sent Michaels over the top rope with a second clothesline and dropped him on the guard rail. Diesel then went after Vachon, pulling him over the guard rail and taking off his artificial leg. Before he could use it, Michaels hit the low blow and used it, with Lawler's headset wrapped up in the leg. Michaels then used the superkick for the pin. 4.5 stars. B. The first of 2 post-pay-per-view dark matches live, Helmsley, Paul Levesque, pinned Mero using his feet on the ropes in what was reported as a so-so match. See Undertaker, Mark Calloway, pinned Mankind, Michael Foley, with the tombstone in what was reported as a terrible match. The world of so-called no-rules bare-knuckles fighting went from the sublime to well past ridiculous over the past week. Among the actions of this past week were a U.S. federal judge ruling on the case believing that pro wrestling was real, a Wayne County, Michigan prosecutor arguing to ban the fighting having not even seen a tape of the event, fighters, producers, reporters and even Baba Booey of the Howard Stern show being either detained, imprisoned or not allowed into Canada for an event which culminated in 8 arrests and several more warrants issued, a prime minister who spoke out against the event because of its danger before it took place, then blaming the media for sensationalizing the story when nobody was injured. Media reports claiming promoters were billing it as the most brutal event in the history of sport despite no such advertising existing, and differing it from boxing because it couldn't be stopped by a referee, in a story the day after the event took place which ended with no injuries and 2 fights out of 6 ending when the referee stepped in and stopped it. A threatened protest march then never transpired, and a police chief being suspended for 30 days. Once again, the Extreme Fighting Championships were a lot more eventful for what took place before and after the show than anything that happened on the pay-per-view itself. EFC 2 was a fiasco at many levels, some of which were things out of control of the promotion. The event took place on April 26 from the Conowick Sports Complex in Conowick, Quebec, an Indian reservation with a population of 6,500, not far from Montreal. The problem started as the Canadian government decided it didn't want the show, but because of disputes over sovereignty of the Indian reservation, couldn't shut down the show itself. It is illegal in Canada to hold a prize fight unless it is sanctioned by a commission. So the Conowick Town Council created its own Mohawk Athletic Commission as the sanctioning body. The Quebec government refused to recognize it as a legitimate commission. So it decided to destroy the show rather than shut it down, by not letting anyone associated with the show into the country based on the idea they were coming into the country with intent to participate in an illegal fight and thus were stopping them from breaking the law. This basically destroyed the planned card as several of the fighters scheduled along with several alternates couldn't get into the country, and destroyed the production of the show as well as the ring announcer, Gary Dell'Abate aka Baba Booey of the Howard Stern Show. Several producers and even reporters that were supposed to cover the show were stopped at customs and sent home. The Quebec production crew, after being threatened with the idea they'd be arrested for just working the show, quit just hours before the show, so the production was basically done by a makeshift team, and it more than showed, being among the most sloppily produced pay-per-view show in history. The people involved in the opening ceremony, with similar threats having been made, also cancelled at the last minute, so that was off the show. Only one fighter who made it into the country pulled out of the show over the arrest threats, since the promoters had assured everyone that Conowick head chief Joe Norton had a written letter of agreement that the Quebec government wouldn't interfere in the live show itself. However, the entire Battlecade crew of fighters and those involved in the production of the crew, apparently to stay one step ahead of authorities, who were planning on rounding everyone up before the show, got on a bus and switched to a hotel 2 hours away before the event. The government then got a court order from Superior Court Judge Maurice Legacy at the last minute banning Bell Canada, a monopoly phone company in Canada, from carrying the signal for the pay-per-view just a few hours before the show for that same reason. That came after Federal Justice Minister Alan Rock the day before the event refused to stop the event. In this case, EFC officials had a backup plan, and had a production truck with satellite capabilities in from Plattsburgh, New York, and the pay-per-view went on as scheduled in both the United States and Canada, much to the dismay of government officials who had believed they had stopped the pay-per-view. Finally, on the day after the show, the government made its response to its failed attempt to stop the pay-per-view. A combination of Quebec police and Conowick peacekeepers, the latter going against the wishes of their tribal leaders, arrested several of the fighters: Steve Nelson, Marcus Conan Silveira, Jim Teachout, Igor Zinoviev and Steve Faulkner at their hotel room on Saturday night on what would be equivalent to a minor misdemeanor charge that normally jail would not be associated with. However, all were brought to jail, theoretically because they were afraid they would leave the country without being formally charged. Also arrested that night were ring announcer Scott Berlinger and referee Jim Donahue. They arrested them after a justice of the peace was around, in which case bail could have been posted immediately for their release, and since Quebec's government closes on Sundays, the charge, which normally would mean being booked and let go, turned into a situation where all the fighters were kept in prison until Monday afternoon. In addition, Booker/announcer John Peretti, who flew home immediately after the event because his pregnant wife was taken ill, when he flew back on Sunday, was met at the airport by police and also taken to prison. All were released on Monday after the Battlecade promoters posted $1,000 Canadian bond per person, agreed to have lawyers for the fighters attend a May 28 pro forma hearing, and all the fighters agreed not to participate in extreme fighting within Quebec. Meanwhile, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, U.S. Federal District Court Judge Avern Cohn was to decide the fate of the May 17 Ultimate Fighting Championships in Detroit. While Cohn backed out of making a ruling, his sentiments were clearly siding with Semaphore, as much of his ruling was in defense of UFC, which, after watching the tape, he said was nothing more than mixed martial arts competition. He also admonished the prosecution when it admitted it hadn't even seen a tape of the event. However, Michigan Assistant Attorney General Michael Lockman left the hearing shaking his head, saying that Cohn's lack of a decision was political, not legal, and that he couldn't believe the judge didn't know pro wrestling was fake. Lockman was attempting to get the UFC stopped based on an 1800s law that outlaws fighting events in Michigan unless they are boxing matches. A later exemption was made for tough man contests, a law which would technically make events such as judo and kickboxing illegal in Michigan, even though events like that have gone on without any problems in the past. The pro wrestling connection came up when Cohn, after viewing the tape, said he believed UFC was similar to pro wrestling, which has never been gone after and has been around in Michigan since the beginning of time. Lockman argued that the difference is that in pro wrestling, it isn't real and the competitors aren't trying to hurt each other. Cohn shot back, saying something to the effect of, "You mean to tell me when they smash their heads into the turnbuckles they aren't trying to hurt the other guy?" Semaphore was represented at the hearing by Dr. Richard Istrico, its regular physician, referee John McCarthy, Dan Severn, Professor Richard Hamilton, Severn's trainer at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, and promoters Bob Marowitz and David Isaacs of Semaphore Entertainment Group. Cohn asked the two sides to come to a compromise, and if they can't reach a compromise by May 6, he'll hold a second hearing and reach a decision at that time. Isaacs said that the judge had already ruled 95% in favor of his side. Even Lockman told People after the hearing that the judge appeared to be leaning in the other direction, but was in search of a pro wrestler to attend the second hearing to testify to the judge that pro wrestling wasn't real. The judge did say that a letter from Detroit Mayor Dennis Archer, who has been silent about the UFC event opposing the fight, could help persuade him to ban the show. He also suggested, after an affidavit from Detroit Executive Deputy Police Chief Benny Napoleon saying if the event goes on, arresting both the fighters and spectators would be necessary to do just that. Lockman argued attempting something of that nature would cause a riot, and that's why they were requesting the event be banned to avoid that. The city of Detroit has already sent a letter to Olympia Stadium Corporation, which runs Cobo Arena, saying that the UFC is an illegal event and therefore they should breach the contract. The Olympia indicated if the court determined the event was illegal, it'd cancel the event. Cohn talked about sending the case to state court, but it is accepted by all at this point that state court wouldn't have time to rule on the legality until after May 17. In Montreal, the extreme fighting story became front-page news for several days as the backdrop for a dispute between the province of Quebec and the Conoit community. The Indian reservation had negotiated with both EFC and UFC about bringing an event to the reservation to raise money. UFC officials said they backed out when they realized just how much the Canadian government was opposed to the event and said it wasn't their style to sneak into a community at the last minute. The community leaders had invited EFC back for subsequent PPVs as well, particularly after the 4,500-seat arena priced from $21 to $200 Canadian sold out in a matter of days after tickets went on sale. On Saturday, Mohawk peacekeepers along with 12 Quebec provincial police went to the hotel where the competitors were staying. They contacted hotel officials for keys and opened up the doors to the rooms of several of the competitors and took them in. The head of the Mohawk peacekeepers, the reservation's own police force, went against the Conoit Council in cooperating with the arrest and making it appear to be a united front between the officers from both the reservation and Quebec. This led to the peacekeepers' chief, Joseph Montour, being suspended without pay from his post for 30 days. The center of the controversy regarding legality, the Mohawk Athletic Commission created for this event, forced promoters to employ 3 fight doctors at ringside and a team of paramedics. Battlecade had planned on only using one doctor, Dr. Joseph Estwanek of Charlotte. Members of the commission were at ringside and were also empowered to stop the fight along with a referee, any one of 3 fight doctors or the cornerman. Competitors were required to wear 5.6-ounce gloves rather than compete bare-knuckled, with a glove designed by Estwanek that allows freedom of hand movement so as not to put the wrestler at a disadvantage. The irony is that the gloves, had the fights gone any distance, protect the hands of the person throwing the punch and actually make it a more dangerous sport. As it turned out, all but 2 fights were very short and the longer bouts involved little or no punching, so the gloves weren't much of a factor, and the only injury in the entire show was John Lewis suffering a cut in his ear that needed 3 stitches. Trouble for EFC started before the show had ever started when several of the fighters who said they were coming into the country to compete in the show were not allowed into the country, forcing numerous lineup changes. Among those not let in were Mike Kennedy, an alternate who ended up spending 3 hours in prison before being sent home, Alfonso Alcaraz, Danielson Maya, Gary Myers, who was not scheduled to compete on the show but was going to attend, and Rudyard Moncayo. In addition, Orlando Veidt, who was scheduled to face Zinoviev in the feature match, got into the country, but refused to fight because of the threats of arrests the competitors. Others were saying Veidt, who was the recipient of one of the most savage knockouts in UFC history against Remco Pardoel and has no ground experience being a Muay Thai fighter, took a look at Zinoviev at the weigh-in and decided fighting him wasn't something he wanted to do. Most competitors and officials were then told not to say they were affiliated with the show in order to get into the country. However, a list was placed at the airport in customs of people believed to be part of the show, which included Delabate of The Stern Show, the scheduled ring announcer, and reporters from Penthouse magazine scheduled to cover the event, and when they tried to come in with various stories, Delabate said he was coming to visit a friend. When their names came up on the list, they were sent home. Even if everything had gone right, it's questionable how good the show would have been. The 6 fights on pay-per-view were over in 90 minutes of a scheduled 3-hour block, with none particularly exciting. Only 2 of the 7 originally scheduled matches took place as planned due to substitutions, and one match was outright cancelled because no alternates were available. Ironically, the match that was most talked about as being the most competitive going in, Ralph Gracie vs. Steve Nelson, did take place and only lasted 44 seconds. Gracie quickly got behind Nelson when Nelson tried a takedown, and punched away at him until the referee stopped it. The other scheduled match that took place saw Marcus Conan Silveira retain his heavyweight title, beating Carl Franks in 1:16 when the referee stopped it because it turned into a standing boxing match and Silveira was throwing a series of unanswered punches. With Veidt out of the picture, Zinoviev, Perhaps the most impressive fighter on the EFC roster, fought Faulkner, billed as the #1 Wing Chun fighter in the world. Numerous credentials and records were enhanced and exaggerated and outright made up throughout the show, and judging from Faulkner's performance, I'd bet that one was as well. Zinoviev had no trouble dispatching Faulkner in 44 seconds. The other main fighter, Jean LaBelle trainee John Lewis, beat Michigan club wrestler Jim Teachout, falsified as having a 200-0 record in amateur wrestling, in 52 seconds after getting behind him and throwing some elbows to the base of the neck, and Teachout tapped. The other two matches saw Jason Canales of Tracy, California, billed as part of the Lions Den, Ken Shamrock's Pancrase fighting team going to a draw with Nigel Scantlebury, a kickboxer from Montreal, in an uneventful match billed in the bantamweight division match. Canales and Scantlebury were billed at 139 pounds, but actually each weighed about 160, but they had no other person at that weight and had been billing creating a bantamweight division. Billing Canales as a Shamrock trainee apparently upset Ken Shamrock, since while it isn't a complete lie, it isn't totally true either, as Shamrock teaches classes and trains fighters and Canales apparently is the former and not the latter, and the Lions Den are the professional fighters he trains who have passed certain requirements as opposed to simply students at his dojo. However, his background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Taekwondo were both complete works. Jean Riviere of Montreal, a 280-pound karate fighter, used his weight to beat Carlos Newton, billed at 205 but appeared to be much smaller, in the most competitive match on the show. Riviere was said to hold a win of Meister Hulk in a match in Brazil, which would mean nothing to anyone watching, but it's almost equivalent and equally as likely as him holding a win over Hickson Gracie, if you get my drift. The time slot change for Monday Nitro due to the NBA playoffs on TNT is going to leave WCW destroyed in the ratings battle through late May. Going live the day after the pay-per-view and unopposed, with Ultimate Warrior vs. Isaac Yankem on top, the WWF posted a 3.9 rating and 5.6 share on April 29, tying its second highest-rated Raw mark in history. WCW, despite trying to get the word out about having the world title change headline its show in the new time slot, drew a 2.1 rating and a 3.9 share. There was no replay showing because the playoff games went long. Raw actually outrated the NBA playoffs, which isn't really unexpected as pro wrestling does better than NBA on cable most of the time anyway, unless it's a really big marquee game, which ranged between a 3.0 and 3.5. New Japan's 6th annual Top of the Super Junior Tournament's participants were announced this past week for the tour, which begins May 23 and ends on June 12 at Osaka Furitsu Gym. This year's tournament will be different than in past years, as they are breaking the 14 wrestlers up into 2 blocks or groups, a block and B block. Each group's wrestlers will have singles matches against one another, 6 bouts in total. The wrestler with the best record in each block goes into the finals in Osaka. With 6 matches and wrestlers trading wins, no doubt there will be ties in one of both blocks, leading to playoff matches on the undercard in Osaka before the championship match as the main event. With Great Sasuke having captured the IWGP Junior title, the winner will probably get the first title shot at Sasuke. Block A consists of El Samurai, Wild Pegasus, Chris Benoit, Koji Kanemoto, Franz Schumann, CWA Austria, Emilio Charles Jr., EMLL, JL, Jerry Lynn, and Tatsuhito Takaiwa. Block B consists of Jushin Liger, Shinjiro Otani, Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Viano 4, AAA, Norio Onaga, and Tokumitsu Ishizawa. Between breaking the groups up and having no inter-block singles matches, and not bringing in the caliber of non-New Japan regulars as in past years, this tournament doesn't on paper appear to be as strong and looking to have as many great matches as in the past. Major events wrestling calendar May 3 to June 3. May 5, FMW Kawasaki Baseball Stadium, Tanaka and Hayabusa vs. Terry Funk and Pogo. May 6, WCW Monday Nitro tapings Daytona Beach, Florida Ocean Center, Giant vs. Luger. May 11th, AAA Triple Mania 4 Chicago International Amphitheater, Conan and Aguilar vs. Pierroth and Karas. May 11th, ECW Philadelphia ECW Arena, Douglas vs. Scorpio. May 11th, All Japan Women WrestleMarine Piad 96 Yokohama Bunka Gym, Kyoko and Takako Inoue vs. Toyota and Shimoda. May 13th, WCW Monday Nitro tapings Nashville, Tennessee Municipal Auditorium, Giant vs. Luger. May 16th, Pancrase Brawl and Budokan pay-per-view taping Tokyo Budokan Hall, Frank Shamrock vs. Rutan. May 17th, UFC 9 pay-per-view Detroit Kobo Arena, Ken Shamrock vs. Severn. May 18th, WWF Philadelphia Core State Spectrum, Michaels vs. Diesel. May 18th, Women's Multi-Promotional Show Tokyo Ota Ward Gymnasium, Satomura and Tamada vs. Shiratori and Omukai May 19th WCW Slamboree Pay-Per-View Baton Rouge Louisiana Centroplex. Giant vs. Sting May 19th WWF New York Madison Square Garden. Michaels vs. Diesel May 20th WCW Monday Nitro Taping Monroe Louisiana Civic Center. May 23rd All Japan Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center. Tao and Kawada vs. Misawa and Akiyama May 24th All Japan Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center. Misawa vs. Tao May 25th Rings Ekaterinburg, Russia. Yamamoto vs. Ramaji May 26th WWF In Your House Pay-Per-View Florence, South Carolina Civic Center. Michaels vs. Smith May 27th UWFI New Japan Tokyo Budokan Hall. May 27th WWF Monday Night Raw Tapings Fayetteville, North Carolina Cumberland County Memorial Auditorium. May 27th WCW Monday Nitro Tapings Macon, Georgia Coliseum. May 28th WWF Superstars Tapings North Charleston, South Carolina Coliseum. June 1st World Wrestling Peace Festival Los Angeles Sports Arena. Inoki and Severn vs. Fujiwara and Mystery Partner June 1st ECW Philadelphia ECW Arena. Results. April 13th Mexico City Juan de la Barrera Gym Promal 700, Irma Gonzalez and Irma Aguilar B La Cola and La Rebelde. King Flashito and Angelito Azteca B Los Payasitos, Pantera del Ring and Nitro and Ultimo Guerrero B Olympia and Broadway and Dragon de Oro. Solar 2 and Skeo and Ninja de Fuego B Fuerza Guerrera and Black Panther and El Signo. Blue Panther and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 B Fantasma and Angel Azteca and Vampiro Canadiense DQ. April 14th Mexico City Arena Coliseo. EMLL, Orito and Brazito de Plata B Firito and Guerrerito del Futuro, Olympus and Filoso and Ultraman Jr. B America and Alcon Negro Jr. and Cadaver de Ultratumba, Mocho Cota and Americo Rocca and Karloff Lagarde Jr. B Yoshihiro Tajiri and Mr. Niebla and Kato Kung Lee, La Fiera and Fantasma and Ringo Mendoza B Bestia Salvaje and Felino and Mano Negra, CMLLHWT title, Rayo de Jalisco Jr. B Apollo Dantes to win title. April 14th Vancouver, Washington, Championship Wrestling USA. Bodyguard B Richie Magnette, Sumito and Bart Sawyer B Colonel De Beers and Buddy Wayne Cord, Lou Andrews and Dane Rush B Bruiser Brian Cox and Billy Two Eagles. April 17th Anderson, South Carolina, WCW Saturday Night Tapings, 4,000 sellout / 2,700 paid, Randy Savage B Shark, Public Enemy NC Nasty Boys, Bobby Eaton B Steve Dahl, Steve Regal Kerr Belfast Bruiser, Giant B Dick Slater, Chris Benoit B Alex Wright, Meng B Steve Armstrong, WCW Tag Titles, Lex Luger and Sting B Harlem Heat. April 17th Tunica, Mississippi USWA, 300, Jesse James Armstrong B Reggie B Fine, USWA Women's Title, Samantha B Miss Texas, USWA Tag Titles, Cyberpunks B Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert DQ, Cyberpunk Fire B Bill Dundee, Ryan Christopher and Moon Dog Spot B Men on Mission. Unified Title, Jerry Lawler B Jeff Jarrett. April 18th Jalapa AAA 3,250 sellout, Pantrita and Super Muñequito B Espectritos 1 and 2 Tony Arce and Vulcano, Rocco Valente B Frisbee and Aguila Solitaria and Joke, Dean Nieblas Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr. B Los Payasos DQ, Cage Match, Cibernetico B Perro Aguayo. April 19th Dallas Sportatorium Continental Wrestling Alliance, Steve Cox B Mike Blackheart, Scott Putski B Sean Summers, Guido Falcone and Vito Mussolini B Renegade Warriors, Mark and Chris Romero aka Youngbloods, Johnny Mantle B Bill Irwin, Devin Michaels and Bo Vegas B Chip the Firebreaker and Rod Price. April 20th Little Rock, Arkansas, WCW 6000, Alex Wright B Disco Inferno, Terry Taylor B Steve Regal, The Giant B Jim Duggan, WCW Tag Titles, Lex Luger and Sting B Harlem Heat, Road Warriors DDQ Rick and Scott Steiner, Randy Savage B Chris Benoit. April 20th Fernandina Beach, Florida, Continental Championship Wrestling, 315, Cuban Assassin B Solitary Ranger Taz, Not Original, B Dale Allen, Wranglers B Ray Taylor and Tim Hughes, James Earl Wright Dale Veazey, B Dan Fonte, Boone Anderson B Lord of Discipline. April 20th St. Louis, Mid-Missouri Wrestling Association, 358, Lighting B Ty Dalton, Hustler B Lumberjack, Tom Sullivan B Drill Instructor, Keith Smith B Eric Bibbs, Frankie D and Gambler B Regine Cajun and Rock and Roll Kid, Danny Hawkins B Pete Padu, Sullivan and Cajun Drew in Finals of Elimination Match. April 20th San Bernardino, California, Golden State Wrestling Association, Matt Sinister B Black Scorpion, Supreme B Kid Chaos, Trash Master and JT Housen B Neighborhood, Rick Sadist B Ladies Man. April 21, Jackson, Tennessee, WCW 4718, Alex Wright b Disco Inferno, The Giant b Jim Duggan, Road Warriors DDQ Rick and Scott Steiner, Sting b Chris Benoit, WCW title, Randy Savage b Ric Flair DQ. April 22, Albany, Georgia, WCW Monday Nitro tapings 6, 500 thirds, 800 paid, American Males b Public Enemy DQ Chris Benoit b Eddie Guerrero, Jim Duggan b Meng, WCW tag titles, Sting and Lex Luger NC Ric Flair and the Giant, WCW tag titles, Sting and Luger b Harlem Heat, Steve Regal b David Finlay, Rick and Scott Steiner b Scott Norton and Ice Train, WCW title, The Giant b Ric Flair to win title. April 22, Munich, Germany, WWF 4702, Godwins and Bushwhackers b Body Donnas and 123 Kid and Leif Cassidy, Justin Bradshaw b Duke Dries, Arm Wrestling, Ahmed Johnson b Davey Boy Smith DQ, Hunter Hearst Helmsley b Savio Vega, Jake Roberts b Razor Ramone, Undertaker b Owen Hart, Bret Hart b Steve Austin, WWF title, Shawn Michaels b Diesel. April 22, Memphis, USWA, Headbangers b Jesse James Armstrong and Shawn Williams, USWA Women's title, Samantha b Miss Texas, USWA tag titles, Cyberpunks b Tommy Rich and Doug Gilbert DQ, Moondogs b Men on Mission, First Blood, Cyberpunk Fire b Bill Dundee, Jerry Lawler b Tony Falk DQ Unified title, Jeff Jarrett b Brian Christopher. April 22, Nago, Okinawa, All Japan Women, Yoshiko Tamura b Tiny Mouth, Genki Misai b Yumi Fukawa, Kaoru Ito and Kumiko Makawa and Yuka Shinobi Atsuko Mita and Shaparita Asari and Sayando, Manami Toyota and Mariko Yoshida b Mima Shimoda and Toshio Yamada, Yumiko Hata b Tomoko Watanabe, Reggie Bennett and Kyoko Inoue b Asia Kong and Takako Inoue. April 23, Shizuku Ishii War 1050, Masahaki Mochizuki b Damien, Masayoshi Motegi b Battle Ranger, Shinichi Nakano b Osamu Teitoko, Ultimo Dragon and Rey Mysterio Jr. b Psychosis and Lionheart, Big Titan NC Koki Kitahara, Taito, Big Titan, and Geto and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki b Kitahara and Nobutaka Araya and Arashi and Yuji Yasurioka. April 23, Koyama, FMW, Combat Toyota b Miwa Sato, Horace Boulder b Hideki Hasaka, Nanjo Hayato and Shooter and Koji Nakagawa b Shoichi Funaki and Takamichi Noku and Riki Fuji, Isakatsu Oya b Jason the Terrible, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Matamari b Aki Kanbayashi and Kaori Nakayama and Megumi Kudo, Haido and Wing Kanemura b Boogeyman and Crypt Keeper, Headhunters and Super Leather b Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Katsutoshi Niyama and Masato Tanaka. April 23, Gasakawa, Okinawa, All Japan Women 2200, Tiny Mouth b Yumi Fukawa, Genki Misae b Yoshiko Tamura, Kumiko Makawa and Toshio Yamada b Yukashina and Mariko Yoshida, Kaoru Ito and Saya Endo b Shaparita Asari and Takako Inoue, Manami Toyota b Atsuko Mita, Yumiko Hata and Mima Shimoda and Kyoko Inoue b Asia Kong and Reggie Bennett and Tomoko Watanabe. April 23, Ninahe, Michinoku Pro 216, Wellington Wilkins Jr. b Saito, Wilkins Jr. b Sugimoto, Naohiro Hoshikawa b Masato Yakashiji, Tiger Mask and Grand Hamada b Ninja de Fuego and Kato Kung Lee, Dick Togo and Men's Tao and Shiryu b Naohiro Hoshikawa and Grand Naniwa and Super Delphin, Great Sasuke b Danny Collins Core. April 23, Columbus, Georgia and WF, Rock and Roll Express b James Earl Wright and David White, Don Sanders b Brian Logan, Greg Valentine b Jason Kidd, Jerry Oates b Dusty Wolf, Tim Horner d Dirty White Boy, Mike Williams b Grappler, Billy Black b Ron Gilliam, Oates b The Punisher, Wolf b Kevin Sexton, Rock and Roll Express b Black and Williams, White Boy b Gilliam. April 24, Rome, Georgia, WCW Saturday Night Tapings 1900, Non-Squash Results, Chris Benoit b Barbarian, Rick and Scott Steiner b State Patrol, Alex Wright b Billy Cannon, Pete Bruner aka Kid Flash, Giant b Marcus Bagwell, Steiner's Ker Scott Norton and Ice Train, Eddie Guerrero b Bobby Eaton, WCW TV title, Lex Luger b Bobby Walker, Sting b VK Wall Street, Submission Match, Wall Street b Craig Pittman. April 24, Kuroshi WAR, Damien b Battle Ranger, Lionheart b Masayoshi Motegi, Shinichi Nakano b Masaaki Mochizuki, Ultimo Dragon and Rey Mysterio Jr. b Psychosis and Yuji Yasurioka, Big Titan b Osamu Teitoko, Hiromichi Fuyuki and Geto and Jado b Nobutaka Araya and Arashi and Koki Kitahara. April 24, Anika, Tokyo Pro Wrestling, Halcón Negro be Damien El Guerrero, Sakikage be Tenakabo Ike, Gecko and Shocker be Akihiko Masuda and Astro Jr., Great Kabuki and Daiko Kubo Benkei be Masanobu Kurisu and Shigeo Okamura, Abdullah the Butcher be Kishin Kawabata, Takashi Ishikawa and Masashi Aoyagi be Mr. Pogo and Toryu. April 24 Nikaho, Michinoku Pro, now Hiro Hoshikawa be Sugimoto, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Saito, Grand Naniwa and Danny Collins and Super Delphin be Masato Yakashiji and Kato Kung Lee and Ninja de Fuego, Tiger Mask and Grand Hamada and Great Sasuke be Shiryu and Men's Tao and Dick Togo. April 25 Narita, FMW, Shoichi Funaki be Shooter, Combat Toyota be Bad Nurse Nakamura, Hideki Hasaka be Boogeyman, Takamichi Noku be Nanjo Hayato, Miwa Sato and Crusher Maidamari and Shark Tsuchiya be Aki Kanbayashi and Kaori Nakayama and Megumi Kudo, Super Leather be Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Crypt Keeper and Headhunters be Riki Fuji and Horace Boulder and Hisakatsu Oya, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Deathmatch, Jason the Terrible and Haido and Wing Kanemura be Masato Tanaka and Katsutoshi Niyama and Koji Nakagawa. April 25 Hirata, Michinoku Pro, 239, now Hiro Hoshikawa be Saito, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Sugimoto, Kato Kung Lee and Ninja de Fuego and Masato Yakashiji be Grand Naniwa and Danny Collins and Super Delphin, Tiger Mask and Grand Hamada and Great Sasuke be Shiryu and Men's Tao and Dick Togo. April 25 Shelbyville, Tennessee, Allstate Wrestling, Hot Chocolate be Jason Vaughn, Tony Falk be Gypsy Joe, Ben Mullins DDQ Kola Khan, Yoshi Kwan be Larry Valentine, Heath and Ken Arden be Brawler Rex and Boogie Woogie Boy, Tracy Smothers be Kid Sensation. April 25 Bakersfield Slammers, Dynamite D be Samoan Kid, Tyrone Little be Jesus Zapata, Samoan Kid beat Sue the Gargoyle DQ, Movie star Mike be Hombre de Oro, Jeff Lindbergh be Bruce Bodine. April 26 Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, ECW 350 Tommy Dreamer be Lil Guido, Axel Rotten and Hack Myers be Bad Crew, El Puerto Ricano be Supernova, Taz be Mikey Whipwreck, ECW Tag Titles, Eliminators be Pit Bulls, Gangstas be Sabu and 2 Cold Scorpio, ECW TV title, Scorpio NC Sabu ECW title, Raven be Shane Douglas. April 26 Osaka Furitsu Gym, rings 3,358, Michael Stanby Hamilton Todor Todorov be Wataru Sakata, Mitsuya Nagai be Brown, Bitsays Terriel be Willie Williams, Maurice Smith be Dick Frey, Nikolai Zue be Volkan, Yoshihisa Yamamoto be Tsuyoshiko Saka. April 26 Troy, Tennessee, USWA, 2,100 Sellout, Spanish Fly be Corey Williams, Reggie be Fine be Jesse James Armstrong, First Blood Match, Cyberpunk Fire be Bill Dundee, USWA Tag Titles, Cyberpunks be Doug Gilbert and Yoshi Kwan, Lumberjack Match for Unified Title, Jeff Jarrett be Jerry Lawler, Brian Christopher and Vader be Sir Mo and Jarrett. April 26 Tokyo Korakuen Hall, War, 2,100 Sellout, Masayoshi Motegi be Battle Ranger, Osamu Teitoko be Kamikaze, Masaaki Mochizuki be Lionheart, Shinichi Nakano be Arashi, Genichiro Tenryu be Big Titan, Ultimo Dragon and Rey Mysterio Jr. be Psychosis and Damien, Koki Kitahara and Nobutaka Araya and Yuji Yasurioka be Hiromichi Fuyuki and Geto Injado. April 26 Tokyo Adaki Ward Center, All Japan Women, 1,750 Yoshiko Tamura be Tiny Mouth, Genki Misai be Yukashina Kumiko Makawa be Yumi Fukawa, Yumiko Hata and Etsuko Mita and Toshio Yamada be Mima Shimoda and Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe, Takako Inoue be Kaoru Ito, Ija Kong and Shaparita Asari be Mariko Yoshida and Manami Toyota. April 26 ME, Tokyo Pro Wrestling, 680 Astro Jr. and Akihiko Masuda be Halcón Negro and Toryu, Sakikage and Gecko be Guerrero de la Muerte and Shocker Daiko Kubo Benkei be Masanobu Kurisu, Mr. Pogo be Masashi Aoyagi, Abdullah the Butcher be Shigeo Okamura, Takashi Ishikawa and Kishin Kawabata be Tenakabo Ike and Great Kabuki. April 26 Kitakata, Michinoku Pro 148, Naohiro Hoshikawa be Sugimoto, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Saito, Danny Collins be Masato Yakashiji, Grand Hamada and Kato Kung Lee Sr. be Grand Naniwa and Super Delphin, Tiger Mask and Ninja de Fuego, Kendo, and Great Sasuke be Shiryu and Men's Tao and Dick Togo DQ. April 26 Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL 1,500, Damian Cito and Firito be Ciclin Chito Ramirez and Saigoncito Dragon, Mascarita Sagrada and Octagon Cheeto B Firito and Damian Cito DQ Ringo Mendoza and Super Astro and Yoshihiro Tajiri D Cadaver de Ultratumba and Espectro Jr. and Cajos, Brasso de Plata and Lizmark and Fantasma B El Satanico and Mano Negra and Archangel DQ, Atlantis and Dandy and Hector Garza B Apollo Dantes and Felino and Dr. Wagner Jr. April 26, Brentwood, New York, Eastern Shores Wrestling, Jimmy Deo B Max Crimson, Ray Odyssey B Mike Norman, Italian Sensation B Shark Attack Kid DQ Tommy Cairo B Devon Storm, Tito Santana B Bob Backlund, Fatu B Sinister Kane, Primo Carnera 3 B Monster Madman, Peter Weeks aka Mondo Vile. April 26, Dallas Sportatorium, Continental Wrestling Alliance, Dan Davis B Al Jackson, Action Jackson B Bubba Monroe, Charlie Norris B Al Walker, Scott Putski B Bill Irwin, Johnny Mantel B Rod Price DQ, CWA Tag Titles, Guido Falcone and Vito Mussolini B Devin Michaels and Bo Vegas to win titles. April 26, Fall Branch, Tennessee, Southern States Wrestling, Major De Beers B Alan Wayne, Justin St. John B Danny Christian, Butch Cassidy B Bad Boy Buck, Equalizer B Bubba, Ricky Morton B Roger Anderson, War Machine and Bo James B Alan King and Steve Flynn. April 26, Inman, South Carolina, Pro Wrestling Federation 63 George South B Carolina Dreamer, Baby Huey B Russian Nightmare, Chris Hamrick B Equalizer, Italian Stallion B Terry Austin DQ, Black Angel 1 Battle Royal. April 26, Childersburg, Alabama, Dixieland Championship Wrestling, 100, Steve Armstrong B Lieutenant Nasty DQ, Stephen Scott Armstrong B Nasty Commandos, Brad Armstrong B Randy Barber, Mr. Tennessee Larry Santo, B The Bullet, Bob Armstrong, DQ, David Lee B Alan Martin. April 26, Addersville, Georgia, North Georgia Wrestling Alliance, Dino Stone B Jason Valentine, Nasty Critter DDQ Keith Arden, Dusty Dotson and Scott Protter B Ken and John Arden, Bambi B Peggy Lee Leather, Keith Arden 1 Battle Royal. April 26, Laredo, Texas, IFWF, Manny Villalobos B Viking, Mr. Wrestling 3, Dusty Wolf, B Chief Little Bear, Ken Timms B Rudy Boy, Dick Murdoch B Mr. Olympia, Timms 1 Battle Royal. April 27, Jacksonville, Florida, WCW 3200, Booty Man B VK Wall Street, Dick Slater Shark, Medusa B Rob Parker, Street Fight, Nasty Boys B Public Enemy, US title, Conan B Eddie Guerrero, WCW title, The Giant B Jim Duggan, Sting B Ric Flair. April 27, Wilmington, ECW, 518, Devon Storm and Damian Kane B El Puerto Ricano and Hack Myers, Taz B Mikey Whipwreck, Tommy Dreamer B Little Guido, Sandman B Axel Rotten, Francine and Pitbulls B Stevie Richards and Eliminators, ECW TV title, 2 Cold Scorpio D Cebu ECW title, Raven B Shane Douglas. April 27, Itako FMW, Combat Toyota B Kaori Nakayama, Horace Boulder B Boogeyman, Taka Michinoku and Shoichi Funaki and Riki Fuji and Hisakatsu Oya B Nanjo Hayato and Shooter and Koji Nakagawa and Masato Tanaka, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Shark Tsuchiya B Megumi Kudo and Aki Kanbayashi, Headhunters B Jason the Terrible and Hido, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Deathmatch, Crypt Keeper and Super Leather B Hideki Hasaka and Wing Kanemura. April 27, Kawaguchi, All Japan Women, 2560 Yoshiko Tamura B Yukishina, Tiny Mouth B Yumi Fukawa, Handicap Match, Mima Shimoda B Ri Tamada and Genki Misae, Manami Toyota and Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito B Takako Inoue and Shaparita Asari and Kumiko Makawa, Tomoko Watanabe B Atsuko Mita, Yumiko Hata and Kyoko Inoue B Asia Kong and Toshio Yamada. April 27, Mexico City Pista Arena Revolucion, EMLL Tanya B Celine, Cerebro and Fiero B Pegaso and Angel de Plata, Filoso and Arana Negra and Ultimatum B Buffalo Salvaje and America and Supremo 2, Dandy and La Fiera and Ringo Mendoza B El Satanico and Grand Marcus Jr. and El Io del Gladiador, CMLL-LT. HWT title Dr. Wagner Jr. B Silver King. April 27, Yardville, New Jersey, NWA 350 Derek Domino B Madman Pondo, Inferno Kid and Ralph Soto B Adrian Hall and Twiggy Ramirez, Rick Ratchet B Boogie Woogie Brown DQ, North American title, Tommy Cairo BD. LeBrown Reckless Youth D Inferno Kid, Tracy Smothers Curry Ace Darling, Bad Attitude B Lost Boys to win American Tag title, Ian Rotten NC Abuda Singh. April 27, Yonezawa Tokyo Pro Wrestling, Shocker B El Kon Negro Tsukikage B Akihiko Masuda, Gecko B Astro Jr., Great Kabuki and Daiko Kubo Benkei B Masanobu Kurisu and Kishin Kawabata, Abdullah the Butcher B Tenakabo Ike, Takashi Ishikawa and Shigeo Okamura be Mr. Pogo and Toryu. April 27, Sakagawa Michinoku Pro 100, Sugimoto de Saito Wellington Wilkins Jr. and Ninja de Fuego, Kendo, be Masato Yakashiji and Danny Collins, Gran Hamada be Grand Naniwa, Dick Togo and Men's Tao and Shiryu be Great Sasuke and Tiger Mask and Naohiro Hoshikawa, CMLL welterweight title, Super Delphin be Kato Kung Lee. April 27, Deptford Township, New Jersey, Independent Pro Wrestling Alliance, 250, Abuda Singh be Lucifer, Gino Caruso be Steve Corino, Cue Ball Carmichael be Glenn Osborne, Johnny Gunn be Corporal Punishment, Jimmy Z be The Rebel, Chuck Williams, DQ Little Louie be King Sleazy, King Kong Bundy be Virgil. April 27, Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts, Century Wrestling Alliance, Vic Steamboat NC Knuckles Nelson, Eric Spraxia be Tito Gonzalez, Paul Zine be Big Dick Lano, Tony Rummel be Skull, Joel Davis be Big City Mike, Nelson be Johnny Angel DQ, Steamboat be Sunny C DQ, Zine be Pink Assassin DQ, Jimmy Snuka be Metalhead, Dungeon Master NC Big City Mike. April 27, Brighton, Tennessee, American Wrestling Alliance, Bad News be Frank Parker, Johnny Reb be JT Storm Core, Derek King be Blade Boudreaux, Super Mario be Todd Johnson, Randy Rocket be Chris Gray, Danny be Good and Tim White be Terry Golden and King, Jimmy Valiant be Blackjack Daniels, Rocket be Bill Dundee DQ. April 27, Conway, New Hampshire, Empire Pro Wrestling, Steve Bradley be Flame Maverick, Wild be El Mascarado, Rick Fuller be Star Warrior, Brittany Brown be Brandy Alexander, Raiders be Bulldogs, Astroman 1 Battle Royal, Bradley on Tournament. April 27, Rossville, Georgia, TWA, Outpatient be Dragon Master No. 2, Dragon Master No. 1 be Michael Collins, Scott James be Risk Taylor, Rick Justice and Chuck Colt be Joel Travis and New One Man Gang, Randy Watkins and Outpatient NC Jimmy Sharp and Frankie Lee. April 27, Gore, Georgia, North Georgia Wrestling Alliance, Mike Golden be Kid Ego, Nasty Critter be Keith Arden DQ, Mark Payne be Dusty Dotson, Scott Protter be Demon of Destruction, Ken and Keith and John Arden be Critter and Demo Stone and Jamie Kyle. April 27, Miramar, Florida, International Pro Wrestling Alliance, 100, Pat McGuire be Mean Mike, Phi Delta Slam and Big Moose be Blair Rogers, Coach Mike be Gorilla Monsoon Jr., Lord Humongous, Gator be Long, be Johnny Evans, Woman vs. Man, Liz Chase be Flex Morgan, Alex G be Barry Houston, Rusty and Bobby Brooks be Cliff Anderson and J.R. James. April 27, Fairview, North Carolina, Great American Wrestling Federation, 72, J.D. Sullivan be John Owens, Ricky Rocket be Bonomo Joe, Terminator Rex and Carolina Heartbreaker be Medic Madness, Viper be Executioner, Mike Murphy and Bambi be KC Thunder and Peggy Lee Leather, Georgia Express and Murphy be Thunder and Rex and Heartbreaker Core. April 27, Indianapolis, Pro Wrestling International, El Diablo be Johnny Utah, Lightning Rod be Craven, Austin and Dallas James be Apollo and Billy Wild, Billy the Kid be Autobahn, Neanderthal 1 Battle Royal, Sergeant Nelson be Trash Luzigan, Heavy Construction be Utah and Neanderthal, Bobo Brazil Jr. and Luzigan and Bond and Wild be James Brothers, and Diamond Dan and Rod. April 28, Lakeland, Florida, WCW 1900 Bootyman be VK Wall Street 1 star, Shark Dick Slater Dud, Medusa be Rob Parker 1 1/4 stars, Nasty Boys be Public Enemy 3 stars, US title Conan be Eddie Guerrero 3 1/2 stars, WCW title Giant be Jim Duggan Dud, Sting be Ric Flair 3 stars. April 28, Queens, New York, EMLL 85, La Diablica be Lady Apache, Ted be Macumba, Felinito and Dragon Cheeto be Orito and Brazito de Plata, Los Brazos and El Dragon be Mr. Mysterio and Tito and Grand Marcus Jr. and Audas, Shark Attack Kid and Tiger Khan be Black Panther and Pharaoh, Solar and El Hijo del Santo be Pirata Morgan and Scorpio Jr. April 28, Ina, All Japan Women, 1950 Yuka Shinobi Tiny Mouth, Yoshiko Tamura be Genki Misae, Handicap Match, Atsuko Mitabi Yumi Fukawa and Ri Tamada, Mima Shimoda and Tashio Yamada and Asia Kong be Shaparita Asari and Kaoru Ito and Mariko Yoshida, Manami Toyota be Kumiko Makawa, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue be Tomoko Watanabe and Yumiko Hata. April 28, Showa FMW, Combat Toyota be Miwa Sato, Jason the Terrible be Boogeyman, Shoichi Funaki and Takamichi Noku be Nanjo Hayato and Shooter, Crypt Keeper be Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Bad Nurse Nakamura and Shark Tsuchiya be Megumi Kudo and Aki Kanbayashi, Headhunters and Super Leather be Ricky Fuji and Horace Boulder and Hisakatsu Oya, Street Fight: Koji Nakagawa and Katsutoshi Niyama and Masato Tanaka v Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura. April 28, Kawanishi, Michinoku Pro 219, Naohiro Hoshikawa v Sugimoto, Wellington Wilkins Jr. v Saito, Danny Collins v Masato Yakashiji, Tiger Mask and Grand Hamada v Grand Naniwa and Super Delphin, Ninja de Fuego and Kato Kung Lian Great Sasuke v Shiryu, and Men's Tao and Dick Togo DQ. April 28, Koriyama, Tokyo Pro Wrestling 1050, Shocker v El Con Negro, Masanobu Kurisu v Tenakabo Ike, Sakikage v Damien El Guerrero, Gecko v Astro Jr., Great Kabuki and Daiko Kubo Benkei v Akihiko Masuda and Shigeo Okamura, Mr. Pogo and Abdullah the Butcher v Kishin Kawabata and Takashi Ishikawa. April 29, Sioux City, Iowa, WWF Monday Night Raw tapings, 3,200 paid, Greg Walsh v Carl the Lumberjack, Mark Merrow v 123 Kid, Davey Boy Smith v Fatu, Undertaker v Owen Hart, Ahmed Johnson v Zip, Vader v Duke Dries, Justin Bradshaw v Aldo Montoya, Shawn Michaels v Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Buddy Donas v Techno Team 2000, Steve Austin v Mero DQ, Savio Vega v Kid DQ, Jake Roberts v Smith Core, Undertaker v Mankind, WWF title, Michaels v Vader. April 29, Osaka Meishima Arena FMW 3525, Horace Boulder v Gasaku Goshigawara, Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Katsutoshi Niyama v Boogeyman and Freddy Krueger, Nanjio Hayato and Ricky Fuji and Robert Gibson v Shooter and Takami Chinoku and Shoichi Funaki, Crypt Keeper v Jason the Terrible, Hiyori Nakayama and Combat Toyota and Megumi Kudo v Bad Nurse Nakamura and Crusher Matamari and Shark Tsuchiya, Headhunters and Super Leather v Hideki Hasaka and Haido and Wing Kanemura, Terry Funk v Hisakatsu Oya, Street Fight, Shoji Nakamaki and Mr. Pogo v Koji Nakagawa and Masato Tanaka. April 29, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Gia, 2300 Matsumoto v Ishii, Aki Kanbayashi and Miwasato v Chihiro Nakano and Meiki Numao, Kendi Akutsu v Toshie Uematsu, Chikeo Nagashima v Sonoko Kato, Tashiya Yamada v Meiko Satomura, Kaoru v Kurula, Harley Saito, Hikari Fukuoka v Bomber Hikari, Chigusa Nagio and Toshie Sato v Shinobu Kondori and Michiko Omukai. Special thanks to Scott Hudson, Steve Prozik, Mike Rogers, Bob Garst, Bruce Bennett, Andy Nichols, Dan Paris, David Isley, Tony Hunter, Harry White, Peggy Watkins, Danny Dees, Kevin Heilbronner, Jeff Bowdren, Jason Meyer, David Milliken, Chuck Laundreman, Eddie Goldman, Faye Ferguson, Dominic Valenti, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Rich Palladino, Barry Drickle, Dan Garza, Brady Lawrence, Greg Klein, Gary Langevin, Ron Lemieux, Greg John, Jesse Money, George Rojas, Bruce Grummert. EMLL don't know about the April 26th show, but the April 28th show in Jamaica, New York drew only 85 fans with virtually no local publicity whatsoever, and that included Al Io del Santo, Los Brazos, Pirata Morgan, Solar, Scorpio Jr., Black Panther, and EMLL Women and Minis. There was a masked wrestler who appeared on the show called Mr. Mysterio, but it was neither Rey Mysterio or Rey Mysterio Jr. The work was said to be very good with a lot of brawling in the audience even though it was in New York. They held an historic match on April 27 in Mexico City at Pista Arena Revolucion as Dr. Wagner Jr. faced Silver King for the CMLL light heavyweight title. What made this so historic is that the two are brothers, which is well known, and they've faced each other numerous times, so it isn't that big of a deal, but that their father, Victor Gonzalez, the original Dr. Wagner, was at ringside for the match. It may have been the first match Gonzalez has attended in years, as he was left paralyzed in an auto accident on April 27, 1986, 10 years ago the day of this match, and the paralysis makes traveling difficult. The accident that ended Gonzalez's career was the same auto accident that ended the life of El Solitario, who is considered the second biggest legend in the history of Mexican wrestling behind only El Santo and ahead of the likes of Mil Mascaras, Blue Demon, and Gory Guerrero. Wagner retained the title with a clean third fall pin in 23 minutes. Also at ringside with Wagner were Los Gitangelos 1 and 2, Kid Guzman and Babe Star, who were all part of the same family. The reason the Arena Mexico anniversary show was last week instead of this week is because Arena Mexico was booked out on April 26, which would have been the 40th anniversary to the day of the first Arena Mexico show. The main show of the week was April 26 at Arena Coliseo before about 1,500 with Atlantis and Dandy and Hector Garza over Apollo Dantes and Felino and Wagner Jr. when Atlantis made Dantes submit in the third fall. They seem to be building toward a Dandy versus Felino feud. In the undercard, Mascara de Sagrada and Octagon Cheeto, the longtime mini top faces with AAA, made their debut beating EMLL Minis Damien Cito and Firito via DQ. The EMLL Minis are much larger, so the match was a disappointment. The Promel television show is now on TV Azteca in Mexico City, which is available for those of you with dishes. The show doesn't have a regular time slot, but on April 28 aired at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. Irma Gonzalez and Irma Aguilar, who were considered old-timers in the early 70s, worked a tag team on the Promel tapings, which were April 13 at Juan de la Barrera Gym. To tell you how old Aguilar is, she made her pro wrestling debut in 1946, and Irma Gonzalez is a great-grandmother. AAA. The weekend television aired the April 18 Jalapa and April 21 Pachuca shows. The only real angles came from Jalapa. In a minis match with Super Muñequito and Pantrita against Espectritos 1 and 2, Ref Mini Tirantes, a dwarf with a Tirantes heel ref gimmick, kept doing the Tirantes fast and slow counts. Los Payasos faced Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. and Teen Nieblas Jr. with a fourth Payaso in their corner. At one point, Halcón Dorado Jr., the fourth member of the four-man team Los Juniors, came to ringside and unmasked the Payaso at ringside, revealing Caras La Momia. Yes, he had the mummy mask under his clown mask. I wonder how the announcers knew if it was the real Caras or an impersonator? The main event was Pero Aguayo versus Cibernetico in a cage match. Jerry Estrada and Pierroth Jr. got into the cage and were destroying Aguayo with a chair, and of course he juiced heavy. Finally Conan, La Parka and Octagon came out for the save. At one point Aguayo, during his comeback, went to hit Cibernetico with a chair, but he moved and Aguayo hit Conan. This was a tease for them to split up, as they've feuded in the past, but as Aguayo tried to appease Conan, Cibernetico climbed out of the cage to win. Conan and Pero immediately joined up in beating up Pierroth. After the match, trivia note: heel manager Miss Janet, pronounced Jeanette but spelled this way, is the niece of EMLL promoters Paco Alonso and Chavo Luteroth, and there are those saying she's betrayed the family by working for AAA in a top-line gimmick. There's now a magazine and newspaper war in regard to wrestling going on. Each group has its own house organs to promote it and run down opposition in general. The general consensus is that EMLL has a big advantage in the newspaper, magazine and arena departments, but AAA has the advantage in talent and booking. Conan came out and ripped Leo del Santo at EMLL in the AAA press, claiming all the publicity they've gotten for doing benefits and raising money for Pentagon were all show and used for promotional purposes. The EMLL press then ripped Conan and AAA heavily in return. All Japan. Some of the key matches for the next tour from May 17 to June 7 were announced, with the major shows being 2 nights in a row at the Sapporo Nakajima Sports Center on May 23 and May 24, and the big show on June 7 at Budokan Hall. May 23 in Sapporo will be Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao defending the tag team titles against Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama, plus Steve Williams vs. Gary Albright and Yoshinari Ogawa defending the PWF Junior title against Satoru Asako. May 24 in Sapporo has Misawa defending the Triple Crown against Tao, Kawada vs. Kenta Kobashi to determine the number 1 contender for the Triple Crown, and Williams and Johnny Ace vs. Albright and Akiyama. No matches have been announced for Budokan Hall because the main event will be a Triple Crown title defense, with the winner of the top 2 matches on May 24 facing each other. The rest of the lineups are the basic All Japan show with the 6-man headliners. Opening night at Korakuen Hall has some different style lineups with Kawada and Albright and Tama and Honda vs. Williams and Ace and Patriot, Misawa and Akiyama and Asako vs. Tao and Ogawa and Kentaro Shiga, while May 18 at Korakuen Hall has Kawada and Tao and Takao Mori vs. Kobashi and Giant Kimala 2 and Honda, Misawa and Asako vs. Williams and Dan Crawford and Akiyama vs. Shiga. April 21 TV show with the Tao Williams Carnival final match drew a 3.4 rating. That match was said to be well above the 4 stars level and the best singles match the two have had with each other. New Japan. The next major shows, besides the regular junior heavyweight tournament tour, will be UWFI cards on May 27th at Budokan Hall, June 7th in Sapporo and June 26th in Nagoya. All 3 shows will be part of the 5th anniversary of the creation of UWFI, and the Budokan show is expected to include wrestlers from at least 5 promotions, with the rumor mill having it that Shiro Koshinaka and Tatsumi Fujinami will form a tag team to face Nobuiko Takata and a partner on top. With Genichiro Tenryu back making New Japan appearances, the ties with War are closer, and War is going to use a lot of New Japan names as drawing cards on its big shows and has July 20th and July 21st booked for Sumo Hall. One of the shows will be headlined by a first-ever Takata vs. Tenryu match. New Japan will also be the lead promotion in a multi-promotional show on June 30th at the Yokohama Arena as a memorial to Rikidozen. A press conference to announce the top matches is expected to take place in about a week. April 20th TV show did a 1.7 rating. Other Japan notes. The remainder of the show for the May 16th Pancrase Budokan Hall pay-per-view show was announced. Besides the top 4 matches, Frank Shamrock vs. Boss Rutan, Minoru Suzuki vs. Guy Mesger, Masakatsu Funaki vs. August Smile, and Oleg Toktarov vs. Ryushi Yanagisawa, are Jason DeLucia vs. Asami Shibuya, Vernon White vs. Takaku Fuke, Manabu Yamada vs. Sammy Schlitt, newcomer from Amsterdam, Yoshiki Takahashi vs. Takafumi Ito, and Yuki Kondo vs. Kunyoki Kiyuma. I guess maybe 6 or 7 of the matches would actually make the pay-per-view. In regard to Pancrase legitimacy, there was a story going around in Quebec that Matt Hume, a former Pancrase wrestler who was one of the organizers of the Hawaiian-based Pancradion Company and was the cornerman for Carl Franks, and is the current trainer of Chemo in Seattle, was saying all of his Pancrase matches were works to people who do martial arts newsletters. The report I got was when he was asked about it, he more or less beat around the bush and didn't say anything other than the only groups he knows of that are 100% shoots are EFC and Satoru Sayama's shooting promotion, which is the group he's headed to Japan to work for. But didn't claim anything else was a work. Reggie Bennett injured her shoulder on May 23rd and will be out of action until June 22nd, which means her match at the WrestleMarinePiad card on May 11th against Asia Kong has been cancelled. Gia Japan drew an overflow crowd of 2,300 to Korakuen Hall on April 29th since it was a noon show before the Tokyo Dome, 3 p.m. start, and Korakuen Mall was filled with more than 60,000 wrestling fans, and lots of them decided to spend time watching the show. Gia promoted it as a major event for them, using Toshio Yamada of AJW, Hikari Fukuoka and Candy Akutsu of JWP, and Karula of LLPW, and the main event saw a tag match with Chigusa Nagio and Shinobu Kondori of LLPW against one another. Nagio and Toshie Sato beat the LLPW team of Kondori and Michiko Amukai on top. FMW drew a crowd of 3,525 to Osaka on April 29th for the return of Terry Funk to the promotion. Funk, in the semi, beat Hisakatsu Oya. Ricky Morton no-showed at least the first night of his one-week tour, however Robert Gibson was there. Funk is planning on doing this week for FMW, another week in July, and there is talk he'll finish his career in Japan for FMW before the end of the year. Wrestle Dream Factory has Korakuen Hall booked on June 11th with Masayoshi Motegi, NWA Junior Heavyweight Champion, versus El Texano, UWA Middleweight Champion, in a double title match. Super Crazy from AAA appears defending the UWA Welterweight title. Maurice Smith made his debut for Rings on the April 26th show in Osaka, which drew only 3,358 to Furitsujin, beating Dick Frey, so he's getting a strong push. Volkan also did a job for Nikolai Zuev in an upset in the semi, with the main event being Yoshihisa Yamamoto over Tsuyoshi Kosaka. The main war angle of the week was April 26th at Korakuen Hall, where the Golden Cups, Yoji Anju and Yoshihiro Takayama and Kenichi Yamamoto, came to ringside during a Gedo and Jado and Hiramichi Fuyuki main event match and caused them to lose a non-title match to Koki Kitahara and Nobutaka Araya and Yuji Yasurioka. The Golden Cups challenge for the 6-man tag title on May 26th in Yokohama. Ultimo Dragon and Rey Mysterio Jr. worked the tour as a tag team, beating Psychosis and a partner, usually Damien, but once it was Lionheart, every night. USWA Vader worked a spot show on April 26th in Troy, Tennessee, and did television on April 27th. The show in Troy, with Vader and Brian Christopher beating Mo and Jeff Jarrett on top, drew a sellout of 2,100 fans and $10,800, which are the best USWA figures for any show in a long time. Vader was a total face on television. As he did an interview, Tony Falk came out and Vader beat the hell out of him. Jarrett, now a full-fledged heel, came out, but Vader ran him off as well. There was no Memphis show on April 29th and they'll have a show on May 6th, although Vader hasn't been announced for that date. They appear to be building a Jarrett-Vader unified title match for somewhere down the line. The only matches announced for May 6th was Lawler vs. Christopher, with the winner getting a shot at Jarrett's belt. Didn't get the figure, but the April 22nd Memphis show drew poorly with Jarrett vs. Christopher, which saw Falk interfere, so Jarrett retained the title and Jerry Lawler vs. Tony Falk as the top two bouts. Jarrett now has Tony Falk as his chauffeur and Frank Morrell as his yes man, and is doing videos similar to those he did before his WWF debut. On the April 22nd show, the Cyberpunk Fire vs. Bill Dundee First Blood match ended with Fire winning, but both Miss Texas and Samantha getting involved to lead to mixed tags. Both Fire vs. Dundee and Jarrett vs. Cyberpunk Ice had television draws. ECW some upcoming lineups. May 10th in Reading, Pennsylvania has Sabu vs. Damien, Tommy Dreamer vs. Brian Lee Falls Count Anywhere, Shane Douglas vs. Rob Van Dam, Too Cold Scorpio vs. New Jack for the TV title, and Chris Jericho vs. Mikey Whipwreck. May 17th in Glen Olden, Pennsylvania has Perry Saturn vs. New Jack, Don Cronus vs. Mustafa, Scorpio vs. Jericho for TV title, Dreamer vs. Lee Falls Count Anywhere, Raven vs. Whipwreck for the ECW title, and Pitbulls vs. Dudleys. May 18th in Allentown, Pennsylvania has Eliminators vs. Gangstas for ECW tag titles, Douglas vs. Dreamer, Sabu vs. Whipwreck, and Taz vs. Scorpio. Some of the past week's ECW television show didn't air on MSG Network due to censoring. Missy Hyatt is putting out an ECW calendar with herself, Kimona, Francine, and Beulah. Bruise brothers were suspended for 3 weeks for the chair throwing incident where one of them threw a chair at a fan. El Puerto Ricano takes amazing bumps. On television this past week, they aired the Beulah angle up to the point where Beulah and Kimona were about to kiss, and then the show ended and they said you wouldn't believe what you'd see next week. It was a tremendous television show when it comes to hype, even though there was wrestling to speak of aside from a short Supernova vs. Puerto Ricano match that was really just a setup for another Gangstas Eliminators brawl. According to New York State Athletic Commission figures, the April 13th show in Queens, New York drew 595 paid and $16,395, although both Paul Heyman and promoter Steve Carl claim that figure is inaccurate and low, saying that was the pre-sale figure. Another source independent of all that several days later gave us the same figures. Weekend house shows were April 26th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania before about 350, and April 27th in Wilmington, Delaware before 518. The biggest angle was in Wilmington, where Fred the Elephant Boy, Fred Schreiber, of the Howard Stern Show did a deal where he's been sending love letters to Missy Hyatt. Hyatt told him to close his eyes and she'd give him a big kiss, so he closed his eyes and naturally Sandman caned him real hard. Here and there. Antonio Inoki held a press conference in Japan on April 25th announcing the World Wrestling Peace Festival for June 1st in Los Angeles and gave basically the same lineup we've been listing all along. The only difference is that Inoki announced the main event of himself and Dan Severn versus Yoshiaki Fujiwara and a mystery partner instead of Craig Pittman. He also announced the Jushin Liger versus Wild Pegasus, Chris Benoit match, so I guess the problems between WCW and New Japan over that specific match have been straightened out. The two changes were the Conan and Pero Aguayo versus Cybernetico and Pierre Roth Jr. match has turned into a six-man with Tatsumi Fujinami and Black Cat on the respective teams, and Lady Apache replaces Lola Gonzalez, Akira Hokuto's tag team partner, against Bull Nakano and Nephili, which makes it a better match because Apache is younger and better than Lola. No triangle match was announced. However, there is still a ton of maneuvering going on regarding the lineup. The WWPF is trying to make a video or at least sell the show to a cable TV network. WCW won't allow any of its performers to appear on either a video or even a television taping, which also means that Mike Tenay, who was the first choice as announcer since he's the only established announcer who can speak English and do a competent job with different styles, can't do the show. Because of that, there are going to be attempts made to change the card so WCW wrestlers just work with each other, for example changing Liger versus Benoit and Alex Wright versus Sasuke to Benoit versus Wright and Liger versus Sasuke, and that would pretty much take Pittman out of the main event because they don't want to put this on a video in either Japan or the US market without Severn and Inoki's match on the tape. Among additional names listed in the newspaper ad for the show, which has Severn, Liger, Conan, Inoki, Sting, Luger, Ultimo Dragon and Pero Aguayo's photos on top, so they are considered the top draws, were Terry Funk, Sabu, Oleg Toktarov, and Jim Neidhart. Sabu is booked in Japan, so he's definitely out of the show. Rey Mysterio Jr. is getting married that day, so he's out of the show, although he was never booked on it to begin with. There is some talk of putting Conan into the triangle match with Funk, although the third person in that match hasn't been determined yet. For those outside the area looking into attending, an office has been set up at 213-680-1368 for information. Bruno Sammartino attended a show to sign autographs on April 24 in Wheeling, West Virginia for Promote Sal Conti. Probably because of the name, the show drew 900 fans, but the ring never arrived. The promoter still paid the talent and had to refund all the ticket money. It's believed one of the area indie promoters paid off the guy who was supposed to deliver the ring not to show up. That is not as unusual an occurrence in this business as you'd think, although more unusual these days since the idea of indies fighting over a territory is a joke since WWF and WCW totally dominate the market everywhere. Border City Wrestling on June 28 in LaSalle, ONT has Dan Severn vs. Geza Coleman Jr. plus Mickey Doyle's retirement match. Spotted of late, John Sutton, Sir Oliver Humperdinck, is now working at a t-shirt shop in Key West, Florida. He claims to have no interest in getting back into the business. He's still doing the color commentary with Gordon Soley for an English-language version of New Japan Pro Wrestling that runs in Europe. Dennis Coralizzo ran a wild main event on April 27 in Yardville, New York with Ian Rotten vs. Abdullah Singh. Rotten was supposed to wrestle Abdullah the Butcher, but Butcher no-showed since he'd made the Tokyo Pro deal and was booked in Japan. It wound up in a gross bloodbath with Rotten hitting Singh in the face with a chair and shattering his nose, and he needed to be hospitalized. Female manager Angel also juiced and ended up going to the hospital, but as it turned out the cut was only superficial. A group called NWF ran a TV taping on April 23 in Columbus, Georgia using people like Rock and Roll Express, Greg Valentine, Jerry Oates, Tim Horner, Billy Black, and Dirty White Boy. Jason Campbell of 5401 Bookhart Road, Dayton, Ohio 45431 has put out a book called Wrestling Supercards and Tournaments, which is basically a compilation of results of the major cards in the US, Canada and Japan over the past 12+ years and results of all the major tournaments in Japan going back to the early 70s and also including UFC events. I don't know a price tag on this, but it's a great piece of reference material. Empire Wrestling Federation on May 5 in San Bernardino, California has Bobby Bradley vs. Zuma KGB on top at the Boys and Girls Club. Titan legal threats kept Doink and Dink from appearing on an indie show on April 27 in Deptford Township, New Jersey for IPWA. Steve Hellwagon of 188S Forkser, Pataskala, Ohio 43062 has finished his first update of his Ric Flair record book, which goes for $1 to those who have already purchased the book. You can purchase both the book and the update, which includes results of more than 3,100 Flair matches plus interviews and other stuff on Flair's career for $30, and the book as a must for Flair fans. Sonny Rogers is doing a show on May 16 in Waukegan, Illinois and Magic City Entertainment Center. Leigh Gutches, a 177-pounder from Oregon State University, was the winner of the second annual Danny Hodge Trophy that goes to the Best Collegiate Wrestler of the Year. Gutches compiled an astonishing record over the past 2 seasons, rivaled only in amateur wrestling history by Hodge, going 69-0 and during 2 seasons, was never reversed once, never put on his back once, and was only taken down once. With the exception of Hodge, no college wrestler in history has won 2 NCAA titles and gone undefeated for 2 seasons with only being taken down once. Hodge was never taken down during his entire collegiate career. Nick Bockwinkel will be appearing, not performing, on a Mid-American Wrestling show on May 11 in West Allis, Wisconsin to sign autographs. UFC 1 change in the May 17 show. Lance Luper is being replaced in the opening match against Rafael Corino of Brazil by Matt Anderson, who comes from the same Taijutsu academy as former champ Steve Jenham. For those placing bets on Shamrock Severn, consider this. Severn has been training 7 hours a day in Arizona since early April, but was flown into Detroit for the hearing on April 26, and then flew to Japan for the Tokyo Dome, then flew back to Arizona, and may fly back to Detroit for another hearing on May 6. I don't know what Shamrock has been doing, but I'm sure he's been traveling a lot less. This is not saying that'll make a difference, just that if everything between the two were dead even, it might be a difference maker. Shamrock is clearly the favorite of most because he won the match last year, but I know one UFC expert who has been uncanny with his accuracy that predicts Severn to win by a decision. CBS TV is doing a show called World's Most Dangerous that will profile Shamrock. Joe Charles pulled out of the May 17th show because he was only offered the same money as he was offered as an alternate Ultimate, believed to be $1,000 to $2,000, and they wanted him to sign an exclusive contract that he wouldn't appear for a rival promotion. Saw a tape of Amari Bitdaddy from Brazil, and he's the real deal. EFC fighters like Steve Nelson, Paul Jones, Ralph Gracie and Booker John Peretti were all on Jerry Springer this past week leading to the pay-per-view. I was told the show came off as a wash. It appeared they brought Jones's wife and Nelson's fiancé on to try and get them say how horrified they were that their men were doing it, but the women didn't respond, as expected. Springer ignored what was said the entire show and blasted the genre at the end, even though I was told most of the guests, and Peretti in particular, did a good job. WCW. The June 6 Buffalo, New York tribute to Ilio Di Paolo show did $86,000 in business the first 2 days tickets went on sale. Apparently the first wrestling sellout ever in the building was 37 years ago with the Destroyer vs. Angelo Poffo as the main event, and the two are pushing to be in Ric Flair and Randy Savage's respective corners for their main event on the show. Card will be Giant vs. Sting for the title, Flair vs. Savage, Lex Luger vs. Jim Duggan for TV title, Conan vs. VK Wall Street for US title, Nasty Boys vs. Public Enemy Street Fight, and Diamond Dallas Page vs. Alex Wright. Upcoming Nitro cards are May 6th in Daytona Beach, subject to mucho change, with Sting vs. Steve Regal, Savage vs. Hugh Morris, Jushin Liger vs. Dean Malenko, and Giant vs. Luger for the title. May 13th in Nashville is Giant vs. Luger for title, Steiners vs. Public Enemy, Chris Benoit vs. David Taylor, and Flair vs. Wall Street. Brian Pillman had plastic surgery on his face on April 25th and was released from the hospital the next day. He had 4 steel plates put in his face. He has one more operation to go to remove the steel rod that was put into his ankle in his first ankle operation. Supposedly Hogan said no more jobs. Nitro on April 29th, which was the taped show from Albany, was the best Nitro in a while when it came to wrestling, but not when it came to announcing. Sting and Luger beat Heat in a tag title match when Jimmy Hart once again threw in the towel for Heat against their wishes. It was a good match, well, at least it was when Booker T was in. Somehow I get this feeling I've written that before. Like 50 times before. Steiners beat Ice Train and Scott Norton in 3:29 of a match that was very good while it lasted. Ice Train has really improved, at least when it comes to timing. In a match that short, you really don't know what he can actually do when it comes to working, although even in this brief time you can see he's improved a lot. David Finlay and Steve Regal had a crazy parking lot brawl for $6.54 that was the most brutal match in WCW since their pay-per-view match. This was a better match than the Piper Goldust deal from WrestleMania, and they didn't use stuntmen and didn't do nearly as much editing when putting it together. Finlay appears to be nuts and Regal appears to be sane except when he's around Finlay. They kicked in at least 2 windshields before Regal got the pin pile driving Finlay on the roof of a car. Both juiced, but the cameras pulled so far back you couldn't see any blood. WCW is losing the standards battle now that WWF has gone in the other direction, as WWF wrestlers can use the word ass with impunity while WCW can't, and WWF can show blood, although it doesn't, while WCW can't. The word now is that WCW is forced to be Brady Bunch while WWF can be a prelude to silk stockings. The Giant Flair title switch only went 5.49 and was a 1 1/2 star match. Pretty bad for a world title switch. By the way, we were incorrect last week when we listed Giant as being the same age Tommy Rich and Kerry Von Erich were when they wore the big belt. Giant turned 25 in February, so he's a year older. The top 2 matches for the June 16th pay-per-view show from Baltimore will be McMichael and Kevin Green vs. Flair and Arnold Anderson, and Giant defending against Luger. WCW Saturday Night from May 4th and May 11th was taped April 24th in Rome, Georgia before 1,900 fans. Flair and Savage both no-showed, but there were signs posted in front of the building. For May 4th, Benoit beat Barbarian when the refs stopped the match. Lee Marshall did another interview with Benoit and Anderson where Sullivan came out and they did the same basic thing where Sullivan and Benoit argued. Steiners, who argued throughout the match to build heat for Slamboree, beat State Patrol. Alex Wright pinned Billy Cannon, formerly Kid Flash, and during the match Cannon did a great shooting star press. Giant was supposed to defend against Luger, but Luger hadn't arrived, so instead Giant destroyed Marcus Bagwell in a few seconds. As that happened, Luger finally showed up in his street clothes doing a run-in and claiming he had car trouble coming from a golf tournament. They're going to do a gimmick where Luger keeps arriving late for every match with Giant for the title. Anyway, this one sets up the May 6th title match at Nitro, which he'll probably arrive late at as well. May 11th show has Steiner's double count-out Fire and Ice in a good short match, Eddie Guerrero over Bobby Eaton. After the match, Regal and Taylor kept yelling at Eaton for losing, so they started teasing a breakup. Public Enemy beat Steve Dahl and Gambler and they did the deal to Dahl on the table, but I think this time the table didn't break. Apparently WCW has been buying the wrong kind of tables, and on the April 22nd Nitro, Scotty Riggs was hurt and needed 24 stitches because the table breaking deal hurt him. TV main saw Wall Street over Pittman in a submission match. Shark interfered, and when Pittman went after him, Wall Street got a sleeper from behind. Said to be a candidate for worst match of the year, but after the last WWF and WCW pay-per-view shows, I don't think anything can be a candidate. Shark is apparently staying but is no longer under contract. Chad Brock, Chip Minton, U.S. Olympic bobsledder, Injun Joe Gomez, Alan Iron Eagle, Kenny Chaos and Rob Ruckus all got tryouts. The latter four worked with each other and had a strong tryout, while Brock looked terrible. Chaos and Ruckus have been working indie shows of late in Kennesaw, Georgia. Gomez is said to have improved a lot since the last time he was in WCW. Weekend house shows were April 27th in Jacksonville, which drew $340,000, April 28th in Lakeland, which did $1,924,000. Reports we got were the best match both nights was Conan vs. Eddie Guerrero. Fans were really upset since Road Warriors, Luger, and Savage were all no-shows because of the Tokyo Dome show, which is something WCW knew about months ago. Conan Guerrero was the only advertised match that actually took place. Fans weren't happy with Flair staying on top since Savage was advertised and they've got the hot program. The replacement undercard matches were Wall Street vs. Booty Man, Shark vs. Dick Slater and Colonel Parker vs. Medusa. Parker is dyeing his hair black and apparently will go back to being a wrestler, as he did an interview at the Lakeland show wearing wrestling trunks and saying he's been a wrestler for years. WCW Saturday Night was taped April 17th in Anderson, South Carolina, and was actually a better show than they've done in a while. Regal and Finlay had another good short match, while Benoit and Alex Wright also had a good match, and Public Enemy Nasty Boys was good as well. They definitely need some quality control because this cruiserweight deal has gotten laughable. On April 22nd, Bischoff said that Benoit had been eliminated from the tournament by Otani in Japan and then ran down a bunch of reasons like jet lag and late phone calls that made him look like more of a whiner than Vince McMahon ever has. 5 days later, they aired Benoit vs. Wright and announced the winner would go to Japan to compete in the finals of the tournament, and of course, Benoit, who was announced as having been eliminated and already come back from Japan a few days earlier, was announced as going to Japan. Of course, the double elimination stuff has never been hinted at again either. The reason all the tapings during a 3-week period from mid-July through early August will be at Disney is because of the Olympics. All the Turner trucks will be covering the Olympics in Atlanta, and basically much of the TV operations are being shut down. WCW didn't want to shut down because it would kill momentum as a competitive wrestling war, so they had to go to Disney since it had its own equipment and do all its taping there, but they'll go back to arenas after the Olympics. The next Clash of Champions will be August 14th in Denver. Expect WCW to fairly quickly go to Hogan vs. Scott Hall and Giant vs. Kevin Nash feuds before the inevitable Giant Hogan Slamboree will end up having 16 matches, as they'll be doing 12 tag team tournament matches, 8 first round and 4 second round matches, with the 4 winning teams in the second round going into the Battle Royal, the Cruiserweight title match, the U.S. title match, the World title match and the Battle Royal. Besides the Nitro figure, other weekend figures for April 27th to 28th were Saturday Night doing a 2.4, Main Event a 1.6 and Pro a 1.4. For the week ending April 14th, which was the week WCW didn't run Nitro and WWF got the 4.7 on Raw, WWF on 162 stations had 5.44 million homes viewing all its shows combined, while WCW on 177 stations had 4.01 million homes. WWF taped Monday Night Raw for the next month on April 29th in Sioux City, Iowa before a sellout of approximately 3,200 fans. The live hour saw Mankind over Bart Gunn using his mouth hold, and he attacked him in the interview area again after the match. Not much heat. Steve Austin beat Scott Taylor using the $1 Million Dream, with Savio Vega doing commentary at ringside challenging him to a strap match. Jim Cornette did an amazing interview and a great angle where they claimed Shawn Michaels had propositioned Diana Smith the night before during the pay-per-view card. It wound up with Michaels and Davey in a very realistic-looking brawl. I don't know if Smith can draw on top after they've been using him for the past 4 months as a stepping stone for no talent faces, but if it doesn't work it won't be because they didn't come up with a great angle to set the match up. Cornette threw in a million double entendres during the interview. Godwin's double countout knew Rockers in a match where the winners were to get a tag title match. Ultimate Warrior quickly pinned Isaac Yankem. Warrior is getting noticeably smaller. There were tons of pro-ECW and anti-WCW signs throughout the arena. They didn't confiscate any signs in Sioux City, but they did confiscate a Flair is God sign in Omaha. For the May 6th Raw, Mark Marrow pinned 1-2-3 Kid and Helmsley got involved in the finish. Smith pinned Fatu. Diana was at ringside and the Samoan buddies were watching. Undertaker pinned Owen Hart. In this match, Goldust was at ringside doing color. Goldust got up and started fondling Paul Bearer, who ran away. At one point when Hart was thrown out of the ring, Goldust began fondling him as well and Hart freaked out. Bearer brought out a casket and Goldust ran away. Undertaker won with a tombstone. For May 13th, Ahmed Johnson pinned Zip and Vader beat Duke Dries. McMahon interviewed Undertaker and Bearer, who came out with a casket with Goldust's name on it for their casket match on the pay-per-view. When Goldust came out a second time, the whole place exploded with the faggot chants. They did that on the pay-per-view as well. Goldust started pawing at Undertaker, but Undertaker stopped him and they had a stare down. Mankind attacked Undertaker and did the mouth hold on him to paralyze him. With Taker out, Goldust got on top of him and started making out with him, including licking his leg, going up with the idea he was going to start sucking him. Goldust started rubbing his own crotch before moving in for the kill when Undertaker sat up and Goldust got out of there. I was told this angle was far, far beyond anything that has ever been done before and the fans were literally stunned. Justin Bradshaw beat Aldo Montoya in a dead match since the fans were still silent from the angle. Finally, Michaels pinned Helmsley. Mr. Perfect was scouting. I'm betting on a Michaels perfect run in the fall. For May 20th, Body Donnas beat Techno Team 2000. Eric Watts has put on a lot of weight since he was last in WWF. Harvey Whippleman was back scouting Techno Team. Austin beat Mero via DQ when Vega interfered and began whipping Austin with a strap after DiBiase interfered first. Vega beat Kid via DQ when Austin attacked Vega. Kid's lip was busted from a spin kick. After the match, Kid and Austin put a chauffeur's cap on Vega. Jim Ross interviewed Bearer, who had a casket, and said Undertaker was in it. Mankind came out and tried to do something to the casket while Goldust kept trying to make out with Bearer. Jake Roberts beat Smith by a count out, which makes all the sense in the world 1 week before a title shot. Clarence Mason came out with a restraining order to keep Michaels away from Diana. Gorilla Monsoon came out and said it was legal, so he ordered Diana away from ringside since he had Michaels doing the color. Diana ended up coming back and threw water in Michaels' face, which Davey Boy didn't see. Michaels began chasing Diana and Davey Boy turned around and saw it and jumped out of the ring to attack Michaels and they brawled. Jake ended up putting the snake on Smith, who lost via count out. In dark matches, Undertaker pinned Mankind in a dud. Ramone vs. Goldust didn't take place obviously, and Michaels pinned Vader with a superkick in less than 4 minutes. Vader was visibly unhappy in the ring, as those at ringside said they could see him saying, "This is BS having to lay down for this guy," before the match, and Vader actually had his shoulders up at the time of the pin. Neither Ramone nor Diesel will be doing any TV jobs on the way out. When Vader did the moonsault on Fatu, instead of piping in fake boos, they simply turned the crowd noise almost totally off. You could see a crowd on its feet cheering but hear no crowd noise. If you are wondering what Davey Boy and Magic do have in common, according to the hotline, both had altercations with referees during that week. Blast from the past. Rob Bartlett is headlining as a comedian at the Sands in Las Vegas. Stephanie Wind is doing commercials for a sandwich chain in Boston. At least WWF knew when to cut the cord. When will WCW figure it out with Rhodes and McMichael? Lots of things went on when you pack 24 wrestlers and keep them together for a 17-day tour, as you can imagine. Diesel and Ramone were flagrantly breaking every company rule they could in full view of everyone. There was tremendous heat on Michaels and Helmsley in particular. Apparently there were guys who actually wanted to deck Michaels but had to be talked out of it because with Michaels' position, it would cost them their job. Sunny left the tour early because she was ribbed to death, including someone taking a dump in her food at one point. Apparently Chris Candido, who didn't leave early, was also being teased and harassed to death by the big boys who acted like school children. There's some sort of romantic triangle, which would be nobody's business except when Sunny had to leave the tour, it becomes business and not personal. Sunny has a lot of heat since she isn't shy about giving her opinion in a business where most won't say anything except behind people's backs. Supposedly Bret Hart was fed up with what happened and it made him feel even more strongly than he did before the tour, even though the consensus still is that he'll be coming back in about 5 months. Final tour show of Germany tour was April 22nd in Munich, which drew 4,702 and $171,347. Advances for May look tremendous, which isn't surprising because this is a rare situation where all the booking angles seem to be hitting. Over the weekend, Action Zone did a 1.5 rating and Mania a 1.2. The readers' pages. Michaels/Hart. A few comments on the Shawn Michaels Bret Hart situation. All the talk of Bret waiting in the wings to see if Shawn falls flat on his face as WWF champion is a bit disingenuous. After all, Bret didn't exactly set the world on fire when Vince gave him the title for the first time. Bret grew into the WWF title over the course of his 3 title reigns, just as Michaels will over what I'm sure will also be a multiple set of reigns. If Bret is grousing over having to put Michaels over at WrestleMania and doesn't want to put Michaels over again at SummerSlam, then he should give his head a shake. When Bret was Intercontinental Champion, Michaels put him over many times, including in ladder matches. I thought this kind of megalomania belonged only to Terry Bollea. Despite all the praise the Iron Man match got, the truth is it was a horribly booked match. Roddy Piper specifically said when announcing the matches that it was given this stipulation so that nobody could win the match by winning one lucky fall. So how does the WWF book the match? No falls in regulation and Michaels wins the title with a lucky fall in overtime. So much for the reasons for having the match. The WWF should have given each man a minimum 2 falls in regulation time. They could have better justified the overtime by explaining that the most falls wins and the first man to win the next fall would win because he would have the most falls. Of course, that way Bret Hart wouldn't have as much to complain about in building the rematch. Michael Jenkinson. Edmonton, Alberta. Pancrase vs. UFC. In response to Joe Silva's letter in the April 29 Observer, the difference in how Pancrase looks as compared to UFC is because Pancrase is a sport with extensive rules while UFC is bare-knuckled combat fighting. Many fans still mix them up. The small rule differences in what makes the match look so diverse. Because they look different, people then begin to suspect faking. Rules are made to make things a trade-off between wrestling and kickboxing. Since Pancrase is a wrestling-based total fight, they choose to wear shoes, but because of that there are many restrictions applied. The Pancrase rule book is several pages long and very meticulously detailed. The pay-per-view show failed to explain the rules in depth, one of which is kicking with the toe being illegal. An interesting note about knockdowns with slaps. Tokyo University conducted a scientific study about the effectiveness of blows such as punches, kicks, slaps, etc. for national television. The results were surprising. Open hand blows have equal power as punches and can knock out an opponent about as frequently. Many martial artists don't realize that. The Japanese martial arts community and journalists generally believe the following. Pancrase should be classified as a shoot group since only a few matches are suspicious of being worked. While Pancrase doesn't fix the finishes as to who wins or loses, every match has a theme as a professional bout and the matchmakers have given instructions to the fighters in regard to that theme. If you say that means it's a work, then I would say Pancrase is a pro wrestling organization. An example of a theme match. On the January 28, 1996 show, Ken Shamrock vs. Yoshiki Takahashi did a standing-only match with no groundwork. It may have been a wise decision not to air that match on the first US pay-per-view since a UFC fan would expect to see Shamrock dominate using ground techniques. The match was a shoot, but not a complete match under Pancrase rules. UWFI is strong-style pro wrestling and proud of being such. Only a few of the 300-plus matches were true shoots. Even the famous Nobuiko Takata vs. Koji Kiao match on October 23, 1992 was a work. However, Takata's intentional high-kick knockout finish was a shoot. Rings is somewhere in the middle. At least one undercard match every card is a total shoot. Akira Maeda and the top foreign fighters matches are all works. From March 25, 1996, when Yoshihisa Yamamoto took over for Maeda as the top star with Maeda out of action with a knee operation, the style was changed to be closer to Pancrase. More than half the matches on that show, including Yamamoto's main event match, were shoots. A new chapter in rings has begun. Unlike UFC undercard fighters, all Pancrase fighters are master of defensive techniques. Besides the rule differences, such as no punching to the head from the mount position and from behind, makes Pancrase as a sport very different from UFC. It requires different strategy, and in Pancrase, it is far easier to avoid being choked out. Like Pancrase, K1 kickboxing also consists of about 20 kickboxers and karate champions who rotate fighting one another. Every new sport starts with a small exclusive group of competitors. Pancrase has a very open policy, however the skill level of even the preliminary wrestlers are much higher than even UFC. There are very few fighters who can even pass the entrance exam, and the training is grueling to make it. Remember that one fighter died in the UWF dojo as well as in the New Japan dojo because they trained so hard. The Pancrase salary system is one of the reasons they call themselves professional wrestlers. The definition of what exactly constitutes 100% real may vary by the person, and Pancrase itself acknowledges it is not a squash shoot. But for those who follow the UWF movement in Japan since the mid-80s, Pancrase is the final chapter in the book From Working to Legitimate Pro Wrestling. A clear line can be drawn between UWFI, rings and pancrase. Winning and losing have never been predetermined in pancrase, although some entertaining and showboating maneuvers certainly exist within the body of the match. I believe pancrase is a more sophisticated and more civilized format of combat sport than UFC and is the future of this type of sport. The Japanese government and police would never allow a UFC event in Japan. Even Japanese Vale Tudo fights have more than 10 types of attacks banned, and the fighters wear gloves. UFC will become closer and closer to pancrase every time out in terms of unadvertised and unwritten rules and format, such as eventually creating a decision system and in time management. The Bart Valley vs. Ken Shamrock match was in Ken's Fujiwara Gumi days before pancrase. I'm personally a big fan of Nobuiko Takata and UWFI and also of rings. Both are definitely more entertaining than pancrase. One of the reasons why New Japan banned weekly pro wrestling is because of its extensive coverage of pancrase, which has broken kayfabe by not fixing the results of its matches. Booker Ricky Chashu hates the concept of pancrase. Tadashi Tanaka. New York, New York. ECW. I'll admit the Raven Beulah Kimona threesome is creative and original. I don't ever recall Sam Mushnick ever using porno movies as an inspiration for his angles. But I was a bit disappointed to see Paul Heyman terminate Beulah's pregnancy so quickly. The angle was ripe with possibilities. They could have brought in the abortionist from Incredibly Strange Wrestling as a bounty hunter for Raven. They could have had the birth take place at the ECW arena. Beulah goes into labor during the first match and is taken backstage, refusing to go to the hospital because, after all, it's hardcore and she wants her baby born hardcore. During the main event, Tommy is handed a note by Todd Gordon and rushes to the back and emerges with a new baby in hand. But much to his horror, the baby is wearing a tie-dyed t-shirt and Poindexter glasses. Even better, 911 makes his triumphant return and choke slams the newborn. Or how about Tommy versus Raven in a baby versus hair match? What about the baby on a pole match rematch? I like watching hot-looking lesbians make out as much as the next guy, but not at the expense of good potential storylines. The next thing you know, Baby Doll will show up at the ECW arena and hand the Sandman a brown manila envelope. Richard Sullivan. Forest City, North Carolina.